All right, it's 12:05. Thank you everyone for attending our first virtual forum of 2021. My name is Cassie Drool and I'm the coordinator of Partners of Scott County Watersheds. Thank you again for attending our forum. Before I introduce Jared, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about what we're up to this year. The mission of Partners of Scott County Watersheds is to improve the stewardship of Scott County watersheds through education, technical guidance, and volunteer opportunities. One of the ways we do that is through these monthly educational forums. We will continue these forums all the way through November of this year, and you can learn more details about the speakers and whether or not we're continuing with virtual or going back to in-person on our Facebook and our webpage, and we also have an email list that you can sign up for. So I also want to thank our partners who help make this organization possible. Partners of Scott County Watersheds functions solely on donations from our partners, as well as our individual members and other individual donations. So thank you so much for your support. We also have our membership and funding partner levels that I have on the screen there. So if you're interested in learning more about becoming a member or a funding partner, you can go to our website, www.partnersofscottcountywatersheds.org. Also, you can save the date. Our next forum will be Tuesday, March 16th from noon to 1. It will probably be virtual again via Zoom, so you can pay attention to our social media and our website for more details on that. Also, for those of you that aren't familiar with our snapshots, those are our volunteer water quality monitoring events in which we recruit 30 to 40 volunteers in the county to test over 60 different sites in Scott County for different water quality parameters. And then we add that data to our 20-year database to monitor the health of our streams. So if you're interested in learning more about that or participating, we will be posting information about those on extremecleanup.org, as well as our social media and web pages. Also, I'm going to let everyone know that we will be taking questions throughout the webinar for Jared to answer. Please keep yourself muted and type any questions either in the chat or the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen on your Zoom, and we will relay those questions to Jared throughout the presentation, and then we will also save time at the end for any additional questions. So thanks again, and I will let Jared begin his presentation.
Hello, everyone. How y'all doing? Go ahead and give me a thumbs up in the chat if you can hear me, please. Yes, all right, beautiful. Not a thumbs up, but I'll take it. Okay, so I am going to pull up this PowerPoint here real quick, take us back up to the top, and boom, awesome. All right, so my name is Jared McGovern with the National Mississippi River Museum and Aquarium up here in Dubuque, Iowa. And as you can see in that picture, I'm not in Dubuque, Iowa, but my mission in life is to inspire. The mission of the National Mississippi River Museum and Aquariums is to inspire stewardship through educational experiences where rivers and history come to life. And I take that mission very seriously. I take it very seriously because I am passionate about people. I work in conservation, I work in natural resources at the museum. However, my focus in the work that I try to do and what we're building out up here at the River Museum is on people. People are by far my favorite animals. We kind of suck sometimes, but hey, I have to believe that every single person, when given the opportunity to do good, will do good. And that is how I approach the work that I do at the museum. And that is one of the reasons why the River Museum has been growing a new department, which I am now leading, called conservation programming. And conservation programming is rooted in 3 key areas: advocacy, applied research, and community engagement. And we'll get into that here momentarily. I just want to let you know too real quick that I may laugh uncomfortably at myself because it's weird looking at a screen presenting to 20 plus people. So if that happens, bear with me. I'm being sincere, always a little nervous doing this stuff. All right, so when you look at that picture right there, I have a new inspiration now, and I think a lot of you also may, if you have children. And it's that little dude right there. That's Freddie. That's my wife Morgan, and that's Rocky Mountain National Park behind you. That was one of my wild places growing up. And so before I transition to this next slide, I want to ask you to share in the chat, if you can, where your wild place was. Dr. James Pease, I don't know if anybody remembers that gentleman, but he was the manager of interpretation at the at the Iowa State University for quite a while. He taught all of us. Reflect on your wild place. Where was your wild place growing up? Where's your wild place right now? Mississippi River, Tower Hill, Wyalusing. Okay, so we got some Wisconsin folk with us. Yellowstone and Grand Canyon. Nice. I love it. So that's the why, right? These wild places connected us to nature, usually at a pretty young age. Mine was a golf course, believe it or not. Thunder Hills Country Club here in Dubuque County, where I'm from. I'm fifth generation Iowan. And Thunder Hills has a lot of land that's in a conservation easement because of the way the driftless area is structured. There's a lot of steep valleys that are not suitable for development. And so the golf course owns these right up to the spring, right up to the headwaters of Catfish Creek there. And I spent my entire youth playing down in that timber. And it's not the same as it used to be. They've actually started selling a lot of that off, and people have started not really taking care of it. So it's kind of sad. Now I trespass when I go back there. Don't tell anybody. But what we're doing here at the River Museum, and I'll switch slides here real quick, is we are asking people, not just at the River Museum, but throughout the Upper Mississippi River Basin, to take care. And the work that we are building out within our conservation programming department is really focusing on a 5-state region, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, and eventually we'll get down into Missouri. We're not quite down there yet. But we are asking people to take conservation action through advocacy, whether that be community advocacy or political advocacy, research, and I'll get more into that in a little bit, and then community engagement. Everything that we are doing at the River Museum is built around community. So another really important part of the work that I do, and I would argue that this is probably the most important part of a lot of the work that we do, is relationships, partnerships, understanding that you are a small piece in the organization that you represent of a much larger effort, something that is beyond you, will live past you, and was around a long time before you. And the partners that I really, really, really do love working with most up here in the Dubuque region are obviously the Dubuque County Conservation Board, the the Dubuque County Conservation Board, the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife Service, Army Corps of Engineers, and some of the work that they do, as well as some of our other nonprofit organizations like Trout Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, our local fly fishers associations. There's so many different people trying to do very similar things that if we were to align our efforts more purposely, we could have a much broader impact. And that is where advocacy, research, and engagement come into play. So in advocacy, the National Mississippi River Museum and Aquarium is accredited by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. And within the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, we are a member of the Aquarium Conservation Partnership. The Aquarium Conservation Partnership has policy priority areas that revolve around 30 by 30 initiatives, climate advocacy, as well as freshwater and marine health and plastics reduction. So in those areas are where the River Museum will be advocating. We are doing so through letters to local decision makers, to political activists currently, not political activists, pardon me, letters directly through the ACP in which we are helping to draft, sign on to, that are then sent to senators in support of different bills, as well as submitting letters in support of President Biden's climate action plan. So we're dipping our toe a little bit into that. We haven't done that a whole lot. When we discuss community advocacy, on the other hand, this is where we're hoping to change behavior, change mindsets within our community, especially when it comes to things such as water quality improvements and plastics reduction things that you choose to purchase, refusing straws when you're in restaurants and what have you. And that kind of leads us to the engagement part. So I'm kind of bouncing around a little bit, but with an engagement, we will be prioritizing teen engagement and community conservation engagement around volunteer opportunities on some of the lands that are managed by many of our partners, helping to increase visibility and opportunity for our local members of our community to engage in actual conservation work, in situ restoration efforts, invasives removal efforts, plastics pollution reduction efforts, cleaning up trash in the river. And the reason that we're trying to do this is because we have seen through research that when you are trying to influence behavior, the more often you engage with people in the behavior you're trying to influence, and the more authentic that experience is, the more likely they are to carry that new behavior into their day-to-day. So the River Museum has until recently been focusing very, very heavily on things such as cognitive and affective outcomes. We're trying to teach people stuff and change attitudes. Now we're really starting to reach into that long-term engagement and purposely trying to influence different behaviors that are more sustainable. Research is where we are going to be facilitating project-based learning opportunities with teens and local university students, partnering with some of our local partners, such as the USGS, which we've been doing some zebra mussel hosting research with them and helping to facilitate a relationship between UW-Platteville and the University of Dubuque in that respect. And that is applied research that is going to identify a problem, research the solution, test the solution, and then come back and work to tweak it and figure out what problems there were so that we might have a usable solution. So this is what Take Care is becoming. This is what the conservation department at the River Museum is becoming. Now, the next few slides you're going to see here are going to showcase some of our key projects in which we are building this foundation of advocacy, research, and community engagement. We are an AZA facility. We have many partners that manage land. We don't manage land. We have a 14-acre campus at the River Museum. We are, as an Association of Zoos and Aquariums member, our greatest strength is wildlife conservation at a species level. But from that species level, we can expand a crazy amount of amazing conservation messaging as well as advocacy efforts. One of those projects that we partner very closely on with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is mussel head starting at the museum and aquarium. So what you're going to see here is just some of the reasons why freshwater mussels are so absolutely amazing. And I'm sorry, people always talk about the charismatic megafauna and how they tug at heartstrings. Mussels are some of the sexiest critters you're ever going to see in your entire life. I absolutely love these things. I've been fascinated by these things since the time I was in middle school, growing up out on the Mississippi River, picking them up on the sandbars. Freshwater mussels are really, really cool. Now, I'm going to warn you here, you may not be able to hear this very well. Unfortunately, the audio is not coming across on your screens and in your systems as well as it is on mine. So I'm going to hit play here, and you will see a quick time lapse, and then I'm going to open it up for discussion after each one of these videos. All right, whose mind was blown by that?
Yeah, that was awesome. Again, if anyone has questions or comments, please type them in the chat box and we can have a discussion with Jared before we move on. Also, we did post the link for that video in the chat if you want to go back and watch it later.
So that was a really interesting partnership that we had with the Iowa Public Television. Iowa IPTV, Iowa PBS, I think is what they've rebranded at, but they have started working with the local AEAs across the state to develop what's known as phenomena for phenomena-based education programming. That phenomena, which could be a short video or a map or a poem or what have you, is meant to drive student questions, and then teachers become more of a facilitator. And they really wanted to learn a lot about freshwater mussels, which really got me excited. Teachers wanted freshwater mussel phenomena. So Iowa Public Television, as part of the Iowa Land and Sky series they were putting together, came to the River Museum and they shot with us for a couple days. The really interesting thing that I really loved about all of this was the number of partners that were showcased while they were filming. So I see there's a couple questions over here. How is the Mississippi River mussel population doing? Really good, actually. There are obviously some big issues that happen in a lot of the tributaries along the Mississippi River. In fact, that's where you see a lot of the bigger kills occurring. But if you work up the Mississippi River a little bit into, say, Pool 1 and 2, up by Minneapolis, St. Paul, they have had some huge successes in bringing mussels back to areas of that river that were devoid of mussel life. And that's the Minnesota DNR that has really been hammering that, and they have done a phenomenal job. In the Dubuque area, we do have a fairly robust mussel population depending on where you go and look. And we do find some fairly rare ones too. There was a mussel relocation project that I was a part of this past summer on Hurricane Island, just across from Finley's Landing here in Dubuque. And we pulled out a couple thousand mussels. I'll have to look back at the report again. And 4 of them were either federally endangered or state endangered in Iowa or Wisconsin. So on the Mississippi River, mussels do a little bit better than what they do in some other smaller tributaries where the water is not as diluted. I mean, they still need our help. 74% of freshwater mussels in this that are known to exist are in need of some form of protection. The location under the I-74 bridge. So I haven't heard much. The Iowa Department of Transportation were the ones that were kind of spearheading that project. I do know that once they completed the relocation effort, there were plans to go back and survey areas where they had released those mussels, especially the ones that they had tagged. So they found federally endangered snuffbox mussels, Higgins eye pearly mussels, and spectacle case mussels when they were doing those relocation projects, and they tagged every single one of those. So part of the long-term monitoring is to go back and survey the areas where they released, especially those federally endangered animals.
All right, we've got a lot of questions, so I'll go ahead and read the next one. Dave is asking, do you use mussels in programming or on display?
We do have mussels on display. They're very common mussels, and it's the only aquarium that you're going to see at the River Museum that is not perfectly clear, and that's for good reason. We do have an automatic feeding system that our living collections team works with. So we do have some live mussels on display in our wet lab at the River Museum, and we do use mussels in programming, and that is part of that authentic conservation engagement work. So we work with, again, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and we will head start mussels on our dock at the River Museum. And we're currently doing a habitat suitability study, which you'll see more of here soon, at the Bee Branch Creek in Dubuque, which is a daylighted stream. And I'll have some more information on that for you here shortly. But we will be working with high school students specifically, who will track the growth of these freshwater mussels throughout the summer. Collegiate interns and high school students working directly with federally endangered animals in a head starting project that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service leads. We partner in on our dock, and all of those animals that are raised at the River Museum will ultimately be released back into either the Mississippi River, or they will be quarantined to make sure that there's no zebra mussel infestation. and then released into zebra mussel negative waterways, such as the Chippewa River, which is the big one that we've been working with the Fish and Wildlife Service on recently.
Okay, awesome. Michael asked, what about zebra mussels? Aren't they the bad guys?
Zebra mussels are the bad guys. They are the bad guys. And, they talk about zebra mussels quite a bit as one of the threats, invasive species to mussel health. But currently, with current events of freshwater mussels, climate change and viral pathogens that some researchers believe are impacting mussels more heavily because they are stressed for other reasons, such as changes in the flow regime of the rivers, sedimentation, water temperature shifts, and then these viral pathogens are just taking over. So that's a big research piece right now. And when you look at mussel recovery plans, most of them along the Mississippi River, they will reference zebra mussel negative habitats. So a lot of the Mississippi River's tributaries that don't have commercial navigation or heavy recreational navigation on them don't have zebra mussels on them. So there's other things happening that are causing those populations to struggle that are not directly related to zebra mussel infestation like you see on the Mississippi River.
Okay, thank you. Damien asked, can or should mussels be added to small farm type ponds to improve water quality?
That is a question for your local DNR fisheries biologists. I do not know.
Okay. You may have answered a couple of these questions. If you have anything to add, you can. How would you describe the mussel activity in the Quad Cities, and how has the project around I-74 gone? I think you've answered those for the most part.
I'd say the mussel activity in the Quad City is awesome. I mean, that is the largest mussel relocation and recovery project ever. I went down there one day, and they had said from one bridge pylon during that construction project, they removed 50,000 individual animals from that location that would have been impacted by the construction, 3 of which were federally endangered species. And it was the DOT that was really pushing with the Fish and Wildlife Service on that project. And I thought that was inspiring. I thought that was very cool.
Great. All right. Looks like we got one more. Are there any types of pollutants that are bad for mussels?
Most of them. One thing that we're working on currently is chloride. So the high conductivity, we found a couple years ago had a really big impact on the mussels that were head starting in the Mississippi or in our ice harbor in Dubuque. I don't know if anybody remembers, but back in 2018, the river was at a historic severe flood stage for like 80 plus days. So up here in Dubuque, the ice harbor that we work in it's a flood mitigation tool. We have floodgates, the flood wall that's 30 feet long, 5.5 miles long, built in 1972. John C. Culver flood wall. Senator Culver got us the money. That's a tangent. Dubuque history. There you go. But they closed the gates. We hadn't had that final flush out of the city. And so all of the road salt that was in the city got stuck in the harbor. There was really no flushing. There was no circulation coming directly from the Mississippi River. So the conductivity level exploded. The chlorophyll level crashed. The copepod population went through the roof, and our mussels were extremely stressed by all of this, to the point where we had higher mortality than what we would have in normal years. So in the B Branch project, which you'll see more of here in a minute, we have students from the University of Dubuque who are out there tracking water quality on a weekly basis for us currently. And they are starting to see some interesting data around chloride levels that fluctuate pretty drastically, as you would expect in almost a 100% urban watershed during the winter months in Iowa. And we do have mussels inside of silos in that stream currently that we tracked survivorship with water quality over the summer, but it was such a dry summer that the water quality didn't really shift all that much. And now we've left them in over the winter. We have this data that the University of Dubuque is collecting for us on chloride and other water quality parameters. And then we'll go back and look at survivorship over the winter and compare those readings. So it's chloride has been one thing recently that has caught my attention.
Okay, looks like we got one more question and then we can continue. Michael also asked if you know if the AZA is still located in Wheeling, West Virginia.
Silver Springs. The Association of Zoos and Aquariums has their headquarters in Silver Springs. It's the same place, Maryland, not West Virginia.
All right, thanks. Okay, keep typing questions in the chat and we will get to them during the next discussion point or at the end. So thanks, Jared. You can continue.
Awesome. Okay, so we are going to continue here, and I do have another video, yay. But this one I'm going to fast forward. Jen Kurth with the Iowa DNR, she discusses some of the internal river systems that are starting to see some really, really cool increases in biodiversity. The one in particular that she references is the Boone River that went from, I think back in the 80s to like 0 species. And then the next time they did a survey, there were 2, then there were 8. And most recently in 2017, I believe, is when she finished her statewide survey. The Boone River had 11 species in it. So we have been seeing mussel populations rebound in some rivers across Iowa. Others, you have also been seeing some mussel populations struggling. But one really cool thing that's happening in Iowa that's gaining momentum across the country is dam removal. And as dams are removed, fish passage is restored and mussel populations are starting to once again migrate into areas where they otherwise would not have had access to because fish migration and fish passage was interfered with. So this one, I'm going to fast forward a little bit to just the River Museum's focus in particular, because we only got about 30 minutes left here. And it's an 8-minute video, so we're going to go right to here.
Development, raising the silt levels of Iowa rivers, mussels were pushed to the brink of extinction. Thankfully, just as regulations were enacted, conservation and education jumped to the mussels' aid as well.
So we're here at the Dubuque Ice Harbor with the Mississippi River Museum, and we're harvesting our cages of infested fish. Black sand shell. To bring in the mussels that dropped off of them over the season. So these mussels will be used for recovery of rivers as far north as the Chippewa River in Wisconsin, and then as far south as around Guttenberg in Iowa.
A harvesting crew of biologists, DNR employees, and volunteers are collecting thousands of juvenile Higgins eye pearly mussels, an endangered mussel found throughout the Midwest. This recovery effort is an excellent example of the interconnected nature of mussels and the aquatic ecosystem they help maintain.
Higgins eye are part of a group of mussels that lure in their host fish. And the females have a part of their mantle, which is the part of the animal that builds their shell, that is modified to look like a fish. And in the turbid water, apparently fish, their vision declines just like ours does. And so they have kind of a basic lure. It's got like a frilly tail and a little bit of an eye spot. And the mussel's able to push her gills up where her larvae are stored, and the fish will come down, sees that, thinks it's lunch, and comes down and takes a bite. And in doing that, it breaks open the female mussel's gills and gets infested with the larvae of the mussel then.
Over the coming weeks, the larvae will transform into juvenile mussels and fall off their fish host to the river bottom. If they settle into a suitable habitat, a new mussel bed will propagate.
These animals don't have eyes. They have photoreceptive cells that can tell if it's light or dark. Itty bitty bundle of nerves that is kind of a brain, but somehow they know what fish eat.
Jared McGovern is an educator at the National Mississippi River Museum and Aquarium, and events like the Higgins Eye Harvest are the perfect experience for students to learn all of the wonders of these seemingly insignificant mollusks.
So these guys and gals right here, you are now a freshwater mussel.
On top of seeing the harvest up close and personal, Dubuque area students learn all about the mussels' Iowa history, their life cycle, species identification practices, and of course a first-hand look at their water filtration powers.
I put these animals in here, 8 o'clock. It's now close to 9 o'clock. And in that time, those animals have filtered about 2.5 gallons of water.
Hands-on field trips like Jared's have the potential to change a student's life. Holding a mussel and learning how humans, wildlife, and the ecosystem depend on it is the kind of experience that builds conservationists. But if not, they at least learn that the quality of their environment can hinge on something as small as a freshwater mussel.
These are a keystone species. They literally create a habitat with their body. These animals, as they grow, they are in such mass, in such volume in certain areas that they will cover the entire bottom of the Mississippi River. And they're going to create a physical structure for algae to grow on, algae which then attracts insects, insects that attract fish. Some fish even breed on these mussel beds. So as a keystone species, if it was not for this particular animal, that habitat would not exist. These animals are one of the coolest and one of the most important critters living in the Mississippi River. And in North America, we have the most diverse population of anywhere else in the world.
Funding for Iowa Land and Sky provided by the Resource Enhancement and Protection Conservation Education Program.
So I'm going to pause right there. For those of you who don't know, REAP CEP, it was only funded for the next 2 years as of the last legislative session. So it's funded this year, should be funded next year, but after that, it's no longer funded again unless the Iowa Outdoor Recreation and Natural Resources Trust Fund is enacted, or the legislature decides that REAP, the Resource Enhancement and Protection Program, should be extended once again. So I will just throw that out there for everyone who is on this call, knowing that REAP has arguably been one of the most successful pieces of legislation for natural resources in the state of Iowa's history. Funding comes from gambling revenues as well as license plate sales. So those conservation license plate sales that you purchase that have the awesome little guy here, the goldfinch. I have a brook trout on mine myself. That money goes towards supporting enhancement and protection of natural areas across the state of Iowa, as well as supporting conservation education programming at all of your local Dubuque County Conservation Boards. I sounded like Porky Pig there for a minute. Didn't quite come out the way I wanted it to. All right, so in addition to being that keystone species, some people don't like it when you use that phrase, but they are. They are described in a lot of circles as a freshwater coral reef. They have a really, really important role in nutrient cycling, removing items from that pelagic ecosystem, that open water ecosystem, depositing them in the sediment and then stirring them up and oxygenating them. So it's not just the things that are living on them, it's the things that are living in the sediment surrounding them that they are also supporting. So those are, that is what we're doing currently at the River Museum with our mussel head starting work on the lower dock. We use submersible upwelling systems and culture cages with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and DNR comes down and helps us out with that too quite a bit. All right. Discussion. Do we have any questions from that piece?
Looks like we have a couple. Claudia asked, when you refer to nutrients, does that include excess nitrates and possibly phosphorus?
When I refer to nutrients, I'm talking about the microscopic plants, animals, the detritus that the mussels are filtering, digesting, and then depositing on the bottom of the river. They are important in nitrogen cycling in the Mississippi River, but when I was referencing nutrients in that respect, I was referencing just food in general that is being taken out of a pelagic environment and deposited into a benthic, a bottom environment.
Okay.
But yes, nitrates and excess phosphorus are definitely concerns when it comes to mussel population health, which is a really great segue because that's the next thing that we're going to talk about. Foreshadowing. Thank you, Claudia.
All right. Michael asked, is there a presence of mussels in the Missouri River too? And do mussels have a positive effect on BOD and COD?
Missouri River, yes. There definitely is a population. I don't work as heavily with that, but I do have colleagues at the Kansas City Zoo that are doing a lot of work down through Missouri with Dr. Barnhart and hopefully Nathan Eckert and the guys down at the Neosho Fish Hatchery will get involved in that here before long. As far as BOD and COD, I mean, I would imagine that's a yes, but I honestly cannot answer that for you.
All right. Well, that is all the questions we have this round, it looks like.
Perfect. All right, well, we're going to transition into one last quick video here. This is what we are doing in the Bee Branch Creek. This is a new thing that we started doing. And one of the reasons we started doing this is because the city of Dubuque took this stream that had been buried for over 100 years. All right, so this video was filmed as part of our Captain's Ball this year. I'm gonna fast forward to about right here.
Hey, Jared.
What are you doing down here?
Well, I wanted to see what you had going on for conservation things at the Bee Branch.
What's that thing?
The golf ball here?
And one of our sponsors.
Conlon Construction, builders since 1903. Well, Jared, I'm here to see what conservation projects you're working on down at the Bee Branch.
Awesome, welcome. We, Mr. Strand, you're gonna love this. We are flexing our muscles. We're flexing our muscles with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Army Corps of Engineers, the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, and of course, the city of Dubuque, because we are in the Bee Branch Greenway. The Bee Branch Greenway is about a mile-long stretch of river that had been buried for about 100 years. And because when the city leadership and designers built this flood mitigation project, they included areas for wildlife to reestablish. They focused on wildlife habitat just as much as they did flood mitigation. So what we've been doing down here this year is we have been working with restoring freshwater mussel populations into this stretch of the Bee Branch, but also performing a habitat suitability study. So we're trying to see just how well mussels could thrive in this habitat before connectivity is restored between the Mississippi River and this mile stretch of creek. We have a lot of really great answers from this summer, but we also have a lot more questions. And so we're hoping to continue this project over the next couple of years to see what reestablishes naturally through fish migration, but also to continue with the public engagement component with the mussels that we have released, as well as our mussel silos.
Hi, Corinne.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. How is this experience going for your students?
Oh, it's wonderful. I love being able to have them out in the field, have some real world experience, some hands-on experience. But then I think the other really important part is the stewardship piece that the River Museum really offers, to see what role can they play in improving the quality of our community.
There you go. The Instabuy they're talking about, I'm taking people on a trip down the river here this summer. Anywho, so the Bee Branch Creek, let me go back here. The Bee Branch Creek project is, it's really exciting because again, that stream had been buried for about 100 years. That's an area that used to be known as Frogtown. It was really marshy, and I can't help but believe that it had a very similar vibe and feel and dynamic as what the Little Maquoketa River currently has, that follows Heritage Trail in Dubuque County all the way over to Farley. And so we're really excited because this is basically a dam removal project that's happening here coming up in this summer. This is a flood mitigation project that was meant to create a more resilient community that flooded on a regular basis. It also happens to be this beautiful greenway that connects the Mississippi River to Heritage Trail. So you can now ride your bike across the entire county of Dubuque, almost, Dyersville. And it is in the most densely populated part of the city. So it gives us this opportunity to go into parts of the community that are really meant for recreation and flood mitigation, but we are working to engage local youth, community members. I was down there every Wednesday at 9 a.m. working with freshwater mussels this summer, and I spoke with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. I had random students that were coming down that were helping me out, measuring buckets, measuring silos, handling these animals, and people really got engaged in this project over the summer. It was really, really cool. And we're going to be continuing it this next summer with Lilliput. We were using Fat Mucket this last year. Lilliput is what we're gonna start playing around with here this summer. So I'm gonna transition here into what may seem like a very abrupt change of pace for everyone, but I promise I'm gonna make the connection. The reason freshwater mussels have been such a focus of this project is because it's something we've been doing and building out over the last 4 to 5 years. Something that we're going to be building out this year is a heavier focus on monarch conservation, pollinator habitat, regenerative agricultural practices as far as advocacy messaging, and soil health, principal engagement, and messaging. And we're using the Monarch Butterfly as the ambassador for all of this messaging. Similar to how the group of animals, freshwater mussels, are a really strong advocate and a really strong ambassador for water quality, direct water quality, invasive species restoration, and the history of how mindsets have shifted when it comes to the value of wildlife, having mussels once been used to make pearl buttons. Now with Monarch Butterflies, that's the terrestrial connection to our aquatic messaging. And Monarch Butterflies, you may have noticed this past year, in December actually, were designated as warranted but precluded from protection under the Endangered Species Act. And the reason given was mostly administrative shortcomings. The list was too long, there weren't enough people, or wasn't enough time, from my understanding. Now, it's probably much more complicated than that. But this past year, there was also a really big crisis message that was coming out of the West Coast. You know, we've been hearing about monarch populations declining over 80% in the eastern population. However, the Western population is even worse off. And the Western population overwinters in Southern California or along the coast. And every November, they do a Thanksgiving count. And they found 2,000 animals this year. 2,000 individuals. That's it. Last year, they found 28,000. And with discussions with colleagues of mine on the West Coast, the Endangered Species Act as a law does not allow for the two populations of monarchs to be split out and protected separately under the Endangered Species Act. They are the same species, after all. Therefore, the Western population's plight, combined with the Eastern population's plight, listed or warranted protection, but it was precluded for mostly administrative reasons. But there's hope because this has also led to a lot of really cool voluntary programs, which I think are setting all of us up as advocates in our region, especially here in the Corn Belt, for really starting to push this mindset of backyard national parks, of backyard habitats, and shifting mindsets as to how we manage green space and how we look at successful agricultural production. One of the programs that the zoo and aquarium organizations spearhead is called SAFE. This is a fairly new effort, and by fairly new, I think it's been around 6 or 7 years, but it's called Saving Animals from Extinction. And it's a way for zoos and aquariums to combine our efforts around specific conservation projects. There are about 2,000 AZA facilities across the country. Collectively, we see around 200 million people annually in a normal year. This past year was not a normal year. But we are working through this Monarch Safe program to create a conservation corridor, specifically through messaging of AZA facilities. There's over 100 of us now that are program partners in this project. And some of the major priority areas are to advocate for reduced pesticide use, especially in backyards, to advocate for green spaces being transitioned into monarch-friendly habitat, welcoming your biodiversity into our yards, and getting rid of that whole Thomas Jefferson mindset as to what a healthy status symbol of a front and backyard really looks like. And then also in areas where tropical milkweed is prevalent, trying to get rid of that because that is causing a lot of problems and really messing with the breeding cycle of monarchs in areas where tropical milkweed is being planted heavily as part of people's landscaping in their yards. Now that map to the right, however, it's a little hard to read, but basically what this is showing is that 83% of our country is privately owned, about 97% of Iowa. And if you look at the Corn Belt on the left, where at least the eastern population has the majority of its production, which is that dotted line area there, and then you look at that image on the right, Kind of striking, isn't it? Where monarchs need the greatest help is the area that is owned most heavily in private hands. So President Biden's 30 by 30 initiatives, and the 30 by 30 initiative was well before President Biden's tenure, is to increase 30% of our oceans, protect 30% of our oceans and 30% of our land by 2030. And what they hope to do with most of that is to enlarge areas that are already protected. In the Midwest, like this in the Corn Belt, that may be a little bit more difficult than what it might be on the West Coast or in some of our marine protected areas. So what we at the River Museum and Aquarium are really, really hopeful for is that, you know, agriculture and cities are the key in finding solutions to monarch, and then by extension, mussels through water quality improvements. Private lands, private landowners are the solution to a lot of the problems that we face in Iowa. And so we are building slowly an effort to help to advocate for these type of processes and ways to make these conservation practices feasible and affordable for private landowners, especially right now within the River Museum areas that are mostly in urban centers. All right, and one of the ways that we're going to be doing this, we are constructing a conservation greenhouse this summer. The Dubuque County Conservation Board started a really cool program that they're spearheading. Caitlin and Megan, the two naturalists up here in Dubuque County, are doing some really amazing work around a mowing to monarchs program. And so what we will be helping them with, as well as the County Soil and Water Conservation District, and hoping to bring in the city of Dubuque here in the next couple of weeks, is head starting prairie plants that will be gifted annually to local residents to help in establishing pollinator habitat on their property. We will be then also using portions of this greenhouse to head start local ecotype species, rare local ecotype species with the Dubuque County Conservation Board that will then be established in restored habitat from some of the remnant areas is where we'll be doing some of that seed collecting. And increased visibility for this. The River Museum welcomes about 200,000 people on an annual basis. So we will also showcase a lot of the really great work that the Dubuque County Conservation Board is doing in regards to their hilltop prairie restoration efforts, the work that they're doing with the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Army Corps of Engineers on bottomland forest restoration work, as well as some of the work they're doing in White Pine Hollow with white pine propagation and the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources with our southern variety of white pine. So there's a lot of really cool conservation messages to share there, but this is also going to be a core volunteer opportunity. And if you can see my cursor, you'll see there's a big red dot or a square rectangle. I swear I know my shapes. That's a concrete slab that is currently vacant. If you've visited the River Museum here in the last couple of years, you'll notice that that had two big boilers on it. We're putting a 24 foot by 14 foot by 11.8 foot greenhouse on that slab that should be constructed here in March. This is the type of greenhouse we're going to be constructing. And then near that is our dock where we host our mussel culture cages in this location. And then along this stretch, and the opposite side of our boathouse is where our submersible upwelling systems that are head starting our juvenile mussels for release are located. So we're building out a mussels and monarch conservation effort that will be showcasing advocacy messaging around habitat restoration work, mindsets as far as how we manage our front yards, supporting in a more robust way resources to aid in regenerative agricultural transition, and then also in direct water quality efforts around plastics pollution reduction. Those are some of the big messages that we are currently building out. All right, what's next? Got 5 minutes, awesome. Next is that we stop leading and coordinating, and instead we take more of a facilitation role. We have a lot of really passionate Generation Z folks, a lot of really passionate teams that we have had the privilege of working with over the last 5 years on some of this work. Those students to the right, those are students from Western Dubuque Community High School. One of them right here, if I can get my cursor again, because in part, most of this is because of the person that she is and the work that she's done, but in part because of her efforts with the River Museum and Aquarium, she has received a full scholarship to attend Coe College and major in sustainability. That's amazing. That's the kind of impact that I hope we can have in a more robust way through the programming that we do at the River Museum. And in order to do that, we have to stop telling students what's important and we have to listen to them. So on the right or on the left here, you'll see that long lanky dude. I know you can't see me right now for those of you who haven't met me, but that's me. And I have a Bobcat jersey on. I also went to Western Dubuque Community High School. And when I was entering those formative years, Iowa State University had a program where they were trying to recruit future science educators. And how they did that is they took us to places, exposed us through a pretty engaging program, but it was mostly direct instruction, journaling. You know, we didn't actually do the work that we were out there learning about. And it wasn't really us designing projects that would live beyond that 2 weeks. What we are planning on building is a program called Teens Take Care, a program that is funded by REAP CEP currently, so thank them very much, where we are building a program by teens for teens, in which we are going to be advocating, facilitating applied research, and working with teens to facilitate ongoing conservation engagement opportunities, using our Mussels and our Monarch efforts as springboards, as foundations in which to introduce teens to conservation efforts and partners. And then from that point on, we take off our coordination hat and we put on our facilitation hat. We work to find resources for these teens. We work to make connections with these teens. We make the National Mississippi River Museum and Aquarium a soapbox or a platform in which these students' voices can be heard regionally and nationally. And we're doing that through REAP CEP's support, through the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, the Coastal Ecosystem Learning Center Network, and NOAA, actually, right now, as well as partnering with the Dubuque County Conservation Board on building out this project. So that's what's next. That's coming up this year. We're working with a consultant currently. We're going to be hosting quite a few focus groups with parents, teens, and local educators in order to build capacity around science literacy with these students. So we're really excited about that. And on that note, questions, concerns, or Dr. Pease would say, mildly inappropriate comments.
All right. Thank you so much, Jared, for sharing all of the awesome, innovative projects that the River Museum is going to be part of this year and going forward. We do have a couple of questions. Curtis asked, what was done on the Boone River to encourage such a big revival of mussels?
Honestly, I think the Boone River part was all about water quality improvements. I'm not sure exactly. Jen Kurth would be a little bit better resource than I. Most of what I've been doing has been really around the tri-state area of Dubuque, Wisconsin, and Illinois for the time being. So I'm not 100% certain what was done directly, but as water quality improves, mussels return. So that is probably what we were seeing over there.
Okay. Dave asked, are you seeing many school groups on site?
We have been getting some interest. There, our school groups coordinator, Missy Wersinger, has been taking some reservations for the spring, which is hopeful. We've been able to welcome a lot of students through schools out day camps, and we have been seeing, and this is very hopeful, I'm very, very hopeful because of this, our attendance at the River Museum has been drastically increasing weekend over weekend. I worked yesterday playing with a belt-driven machine shop and working in our wet lab. And it was President's Day, but also 2 school districts canceled because of the cold. And we were busy. We had hundreds of people at the museum yesterday. So there's hope. We're turning a corner. People want to do this stuff. They want to come to us. I'm just hopeful that we will be able to do it safely. And what better way to do it than outside, right?
Absolutely. All right, it is 1 o'clock. If you have any last minute questions, please get them in now.
And I'm not in any hurry. So if anybody wants to stick around, I'd be happy to continue hanging out with y'all. Otherwise, I have to go fill out AZA conservation reports.
Jared, do you have a slide with your contact info that you can share with everyone?
I do. There it is. There's my email on the bottom, jmcgovern, all one word, all lowercase, at rivermuseum.com.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jared, for your awesome presentation. Thanks to everyone who attended today. If you want to see this again, or if you know of anyone that missed it and wanted to view it, we are recording this and we will put it on Partners of Scott County Watershed's YouTube page in the near future. So thanks again, and we will see you next month for the March Forum.
Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Michael. How mild, how inappropriate. Let's keep it PG. Oh, I love it. And yes, that photo was from Yellowstone National Park for you again, Michael. That was Yellowstone in 2007. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Great day.